Boa noite a todos. Obrigada, Pedro, Raul e todos os professores e organizadores desse evento, dessa semana. É um prazer estar aqui. Bom, como o Pedro falou, eu represento o Instituto de Políticas de Transporte e Desenvolvimento. Não vou falar de transporte, mas a gente discute muito a cidade e a questão da sustentabilidade da cidade, e por isso que eu estou aqui participando com vocês hoje. Eu queria só fazer uma pequena introdução para essa mesa, falando um pouquinho do papel da favela e as novas intervenções nas favelas, como é que a gente vê isso, o que a gente queria tirar dessa conversa hoje. Então, como eu acredito que vocês já entendem bem, né, tem sido muito discutido essa semana, a favela tem um papel importantíssimo no tecido urbano das cidades brasileiras, e a maior parte das pessoas que vivem nas favelas, principalmente no Rio de Janeiro, desde o final do século XIX, vivem porque estão excluídos, na verdade, de um mercado formal de habitação social. Durante muito tempo, a principal abordagem do poder público era, na verdade, de eliminar essas formas de ocupação, né? E, no entanto, os reassentamentos continuavam desarticulados da cidade. Então, quer dizer, as pessoas as suas habitações eram eliminadas e eles eram colocados na periferia da cidade, então ainda continuavam longe das suas fontes de trabalho, então a ocupação informal nas áreas mais centrais, mais próximas do centro, continuaram acontecendo e crescendo. Nos anos 90, aqui no Rio de Janeiro, Favela Bairro e outras intervenções semelhantes em São Paulo e em Salvador, trouxeram uma nova abordagem que foi de integrar esse espaço urbano, esse espaço da favela, ao espaço urbano, formal, regulamentado. Eu acho que agora a gente está numa outra etapa que ela vai para além da requalificação da favela, mas ela principalmente está focada em entender o que na favela tem de positivo, quais são os potenciais da favela e como que a gente pode canalizar esses potenciais para, de fato, solucionar os problemas locais, ou minimizar os problemas locais. Na terça-feira, na palestra que teve aqui, Favela e Desenvolvimento, teve uma fala do professor Chakrabarti, né? E ele falou uma coisa que eu achei interessante nesse sentido, que ele falou da necessidade de se entender os aspectos positivos na favela e como que, na verdade, a forma como o território se organiza na favela deveria, na verdade, informar o desenvolvimento de cidades no mundo inteiro. O que é isso, né? Ele mencionou um fato que eu achei interessante, que é como que o uso e a ocupação do solo na favela tem um uso misto. Então, é muito vibrante o espaço na favela. Isso é inegável. Da mesma forma, a gente vê também na favela componentes importantes do que a gente considera desenvolvimento de cidades sustentáveis. A favela é um espaço compacto, é um espaço adensado, tem uma rede de ruas, de vielas muito densa. Então, quer dizer, tem uma presença ali do pedestre muito forte. E é claro, é inegável que muito precisa ser feito para que o pedestre seja de fato a prioridade e que tenha um espaço confortável e conveniente, mas esses componentes que fazem parte da cidade sustentável, eles estão presentes. Eu acho que é importante a gente olhar para isso e ver como que isso pode nos ajudar. Então, a pergunta que a gente quer responder aqui hoje é exatamente olhando para isso, né? Então, quais intervenções que a gente pode propor nesse território e principalmente na governança desse território, que considere a sua morfologia urbana, que considere as suas condições topográficas e, acima de tudo que existe de espontâneo no desenvolvimento da comunidade. Então, todo o empreendedorismo local que existe e toda a diversidade nesse empreendedorismo. Então, o desafio que a gente coloca aqui para os três palestrantes é pensar como que a gente pode olhar para essa área que é absolutamente vibrante, é absolutamente empreendedora, é absolutamente diversa e pensar nos desafios que a gente tem do ponto de vista de saúde pública e do ponto de vista de poluição, como que a gente usa esse potencial local para avançar. Então, uma pena que a gente não tem uma área aqui que ia poder contar um pouquinho dessa história, mas a gente vai começar então agora, imagina, é um prazer ter a gente aqui conosco para falar de saúde pública. Obrigada. people towards walking for transportation and a little bit away from using private vehicles. And traditionally, the way that's been measured somewhat in urban planning and in public health was through looking at density and mixed land use and also access to both kinds of transportation and transit systems. But what I want to do today is talk about sort of how we've been pushing that work forward beyond those initial ideas. And so one of the problems that we've run into is that those are very simplified, and density can take on a very different meaning in a place like Pedras or in New York City. And so trying to understand what else we can measure that's relevant to the pedestrian experience as they're potentially walking through a city. And in trying to understand how to do that, one of the things that we did is to look to some of the ideas of urban design. And particularly the work of reviewing has been very influential for us, and trying to understand how some of the concepts that he brings out in different city landscapes and streetscapes can then play into our public health research. And so I think there's an idea that there are different concepts, different parts of the experience. Musical background being among them, but different aspects of the streetscapes that might give a sense of human scale, transparency, enclosure, and to really think through these different aspects and how they relate to particular features in the environment. And in public health, doing research across wide areas, we're always trying to figure out how can we take this from the very rich experience that a person has in a particular location, something that we can measure across a wide area, like across all of New York City. And so we've taken these different elements and building on previous work to understand dimensions of the environment, we've then gone from there to try to look at what are the features that we can measure. And so just to look closely for a minute at this set of features, we can map out proxies for things like immutability, enclosure across the city. And if we focus in on just one, just to think about enclosure as one of these concepts, we can see that a piece of what we might measure is how street trees could create an experience of enclosure as you're walking along, and contribute also to a pedestrian-friendly environment through providing shade. And so we've gone sort of from these measures that were readily available, but perhaps not capturing all of that streetscape that's relevant to pedestrians, to getting broader concepts like enclosure and transparency, which we've measured across the city, and then drilling back down to what are the particular aspects of the environment that we can measure and change that would be relevant to the pedestrian experience and relevant to a feeling of comfort as a pedestrian. One of the reasons that I narrowed in on street trees in particular is that that's an aspect of the environment that's being changed actively in New York. There's a million tree planting project, Million Trees NYC, and it's one of a number of such urban planting projects that are in cities across the world. And in New York, you can tell which tree is part of this planting by looking at these little tags and say 1 in a million. So trees is one of the part of this process. They're about 2/3 of the way through. And what I found fascinating is that although these tree plantings are largely motivated by shifting the environment, goals that are outside of health, these aren't a pharmaceutical treatment, but still health is among the goals that we'd like to support through making spaces greener in the city. And you can see that with some of the advertising, some of the messages to the public about this tree planting process. And so this, you can see it says, "Let's breathe NYC," and it's got trees making out the shape of a lung and other messages making it clear that there was an idea of trees as relevant for respiratory health, relevant for lungs, relevant for air quality, and the hope was that if we could plant trees, we'd address some of the traffic-related pollution problems in the air. And they actually decided to prioritize in their planting areas that had high childhood asthma. And so
that the tree planting was discussed and even the way it was planned, because they couldn't plant a million trees instantly. They had to stage it out over a decade. However, what we saw was that there was really a lot of jumps in the assumptions needed to say that trees were going to be beneficial for health. And I'm always interested in where we can step back and take these assumptions and actually investigate them more closely to understand, is health, and respiratory health in particular, something that can be justified as a benefit for tree planting, and does it matter how we go about the tree planting? Is it right to frame it in this way of a million trees, or is there some other way that we can make sure that we get the benefits in terms of health? So we went about getting a grant, which is how our projects start. We get grants to fund this work, and this was building on some unfunded analysis across the city. And we just realized we needed more money in order to make a really comprehensive measure of trees, to link it to longitudinal information on people, so we could understand whether being around more trees would credibly reduce childhood asthma or symptoms of childhood asthma, and also whether it might have any other consequences. So in this work, we partnered with people who are at the Department of Health studying air quality across the city, and also in the Parks and Rec Forestry Division, and we're funded through a forestry grant. So we were very much tied to people who were interested in this as a potential solution, and we were looking for that as well. But as always in doing the research, we weren't necessarily setting out to advocate for trees. We really wanted to know what's the role of increasing the urban forest in health. So we wanted to figure out what can we do to get better measures and to add to the knowledge that we have. So to get a better measure, we used LiDAR data from across the city, which gives us this 3D perspective that you can see looking down here to Columbus Circle. And trees, you can tell, have a very distinct height and texture profile that allows us to separate the tree canopy from other types of vegetation and from signs or buildings around the city. So with that, we could combine other sources of information, including satellite imagery and data that was brought together to look at each area of the city, including the areas near where our participants live, and for a circle around each home, understand what portion of that circle is covered by trees. So in some ways, we take very sophisticated data and get it down to a simple measure that we can analyze across the entire city that helps us to identify tree canopy in particular. And we're not allowed, of course, to show participant addresses, so this is where I was living while doing the work. We were interested in taking a balanced view of the potential benefits and disadvantages of having more trees around. And so tree pollen allergy was one of the things that we were wanting to bring into the study. And so this is just a simple description showing that across areas with less tree canopy compared to more tree canopy, the children who are living in areas with more tree canopy early in life, they were more likely by age 7 to have allergic sensitization of tree pollen. So we had a blood test to check for an allergic response in the blood to tree pollen, and we saw this was more common. And this held up to our more comprehensive analysis approaches, and we were able to also investigate the idea of maybe asthma would be reduced. We didn't see so much evidence for that, but what we did see, and we replicated in a second unpublished study, is that children who lived near more trees early in life were more likely to be allergic to trees, more likely to show this blood test sensitization to tree pollen by age 7. And so this has really been a challenge to think about what's the message if we're going to continue in New York City and in other places in these massive tree plantings. Do we need to be thinking not only about the volume, but also about species selection and how that can be optimized to avoid any unintended negatives like allergic response? I think it's important to keep in people who have an allergy might have an exacerbation in response to having more tree pollen nearby, having more trees nearby. But this was trying to specifically understand if you would be more likely to become allergic based on your environment early in life. And it fits with other health data that we have that exposure to certain things that people can be allergic to actually predisposes the allergy itself. So in hearing the different conversations over the course of this week, I've been thinking about a fundamental challenge in studying some of these positive aspects of the environment and their effect on health. And one is that we can't plant mature trees and increase the canopy in a very quick way. It has to mature over time. There's a process of cultivation that takes an investment. In comparison, trees can be eliminated very quickly. So some of the work that's looked at diseases that affect trees and take out ash, for example, in large areas, they can look at a very quick change that's very dramatic. And I was thinking about this particularly as we discussed the Pedras and the amount of trust that's in that community and the potential benefits of the networks that are there. And those are hard won. It takes some time to build those up, and I think we need to just be very cognizant anytime we're in a process of neighborhood change, not to destroy something that's very tenuous, but gives a lot of resilience to the community. So with that, I wanted to just close with a quote from one of my favorite writers, Jay Jacobs, about cities, and that we really need to take a place like Pedras and think about the people there and what they need and how we can serve them. And I think that's really what we're all trying to do here. So I want to thank you very much. I want to give an opportunity for my colleague Andrew Rundle to speak about some of the new directions in our research as well.
Good evening. Since the first speaker couldn't be here, Gina and I thought that I would take a small amount of time to talk about some of the work that we're doing next. And as Gina said several times in her talk, we like to measure stuff. So as epidemiologists, we're always trying to figure out ways or understand ways that we can measure concepts or constructs from urban design, architecture, social processes, and create numeric data out of that, or some contextual measurement that we can then translate to health, to try and quantify links between neighborhood characteristics and health outcomes. And so a lot of what we do is really, we count stuff. And we spend a lot of time counting stuff, which is very, very different from the experience I've had with the students here, seeing their models and talking about the process of developing architectural ideas. But we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about counting stuff. I don't actually know Gina's animation sequence. Is it animated? No. That's it. Okay. So, one of the methods for understanding neighborhoods traditionally that has come out of urban sociology is to actually just walk around the neighborhood and collect data, collect observational data of what is in that neighborhood and how does it feel to be in that neighborhood. And there are a series of methodologies of structured observation where trained teams will go out into a neighborhood and will collect structured observational information about whether or not there are crosswalks, whether or not there are graffiti, whether or not people are walking on the streets, whether or not there are curb cuts. And there are all these methodologies for doing this. The difficulty is it actually costs a lot of money to send trained teams out into neighborhoods to collect data by walking around. In fact, about 70% of the costs of doing a project like this are simply the amount of time and energy it takes you to get from the university to the neighborhood, to the next neighborhood, to the next block. And so we've been working with Street View by Google to try an idea of doing virtual walkarounds. So the idea is rather than sending our trained teams into a neighborhood to collect data on whether or not there's a crosswalk, whether or not there's graffiti, whether or not there's a no U-turn sign, instead we would set up Google Street View, program in a series of walks through neighborhoods using Google Street View and have our trained teams actually just sitting at Columbia University, walking through the neighborhoods and collecting information about the urban design that way. And this saves us about 70% of our costs, which means we can go to vastly more streets than we could if we were actually having people physically walk through the neighborhood. Now you lose something here. You lose sort of this ineffable sense of what it is like to walk. What is the smell? What is the sound? Maybe some of the color, maybe some of the detail that's out there. But we can collect vastly more data about urban design by doing these virtual reality walk-through neighborhoods. And so one of the things that came to me as we were walking through the favelas was that one of the standard things that people collect in these types of work is information about graffiti. And graffiti is often in the US context used as a measure of disorder, social disorder. Yet when we walk through the favelas here, what we see in a way is almost that some of the graffiti, these beautiful murals, are actually an indication of some kind of order, because there has been a system to create these murals, to create permission for these murals, to maintain these murals, and in a way, this idea of graffiti has a different meaning here. So in thinking about translating some of our ideas about how you collect information about neighborhoods, we have to rethink what some of these ideas might mean in a new context. There really isn't a context for these ideas we develop. And so we have this system, we call it Canvas, and we have a system in place that allows people to walk virtually through neighborhoods and collect data about urban design. And again, we're always looking for ways to make things measurable on a massive scale so that we can measure characteristics of entire cities. The second piece that we're doing is we talk about how neighborhoods support health. And we talk about how people interact with their neighborhood, and they go to places and they do things. But we don't really actually have any good data at all on how people interact with their neighborhood, where they go, how much time they spend, and how much space they use. And so we're now working on studies in which we ask participants to carry a GPS logger. It's a device that uses GPS satellites to just capture every 5 seconds their location as they walk through a neighborhood. And we want to use this data to understand how people really use a neighborhood, as opposed to researchers thinking about theories about how people might use a neighborhood. We can use GPS to actually know. And so this is an image of some of our data. Traditionally, this individual lives here. This is like their home. Traditionally, we would use our geographic information system software, draw a circle around their home, maybe like 1 kilometer, and we would assume that that circle represents their neighborhood. Or if we were getting really fancy, we might use street grid network data and say, well, because of the way the streets are set up, they can't really use the entire circle, so we'll just look at the neighborhood space that they could use if they walk on the streets. And in this case, for this individual, this blue, weird polygon is all the space that that person could get to by walking on the street network for 1 kilometer. But when we actually look at this person's GPS data for 7 days, what we see is they don't use vast amounts of the space that they have available to them. In fact, some of their routes are just repeated over and over and over again. And so we use this GPS data to try and understand how people really, truly interact with their space, and what parts of the neighborhood really that they use. And then the second thing that we'd like to do is try and understand what it is in the neighborhood that makes somebody never go over here, or never go over here. So we have data on crime, we have data on urban design, we have lots of data about their city, and the questions we're asking are there parts or characteristics of these neighborhoods that really direct how people use their neighborhoods, or maybe avoid parts of their neighborhoods? And so what we've been able to show is that there are aspects of urban design that really draw people to use space, and the spaces that they use are very, very different from the spaces that they don't use, even when it's really close to their home. That they systematically embrace certain areas and systematically avoid areas. And you probably are all thinking to yourself, really? No kidding, of course. I totally don't use parts of my neighborhood, and I totally do use parts of my neighborhood. And you've all probably experienced population scale. They're trying to understand this from many, 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 many people, and then understand systematically what it is about neighborhoods that cause people to use or not use parts of their space, so that we can think about what is important about urban planning, or maybe policing, or maybe garbage removal, or maybe aesthetics that draw people into certain places. And so where we're going now is trying to do a lot of work with GPS devices to really understand how people use their neighborhoods. And one of the cool things that we can do is, because in New York City we know the location of every business, so we can cross the GPS data of the locations of businesses to understand, do people use the gym? Are they going into the gyms? Are they going into supermarkets? Are they going into bars? Are they going into restaurants? And so we use our computer technology that tells us where things are, and our GPS technology to know where people go, to try and systematically understand how things like retail space, commercial space, public space influences how people embrace their neighborhood. So this is all I have now. I just wanted to give a short taste of some of the kinds of technologies and work that we're doing moving forward. So thank you for your attention.
Good evening, everyone. It's again my pleasure to be here and share some of the work that we are doing. Is this good? Can you all hear me? Can you all hear the music?
Arctic always works for the band.
Anyway, so what I'm going to focus on today is the connection between water, energy, food in the context of cities the way we know them, cities the way we don't know them, and possibly a new model of the cities. So there's water, energy, food, and this is one view of Rio, and this is the other view from Rio's Pedras. And so in terms of what perhaps my background is, I have a couple of degrees in chemical engineering and environmental engineering. So a lot of what I do focuses on, of course, understanding biological systems, but on the other end of the spectrum is also really taking that knowledge and building systems and implementing these systems. Some of the earliest projects I worked on were for the city of New York, and this is a plant in Brooklyn which is still running, and this was one of the earliest installations of advanced wastewater treatment, where we were also removing nitrogen, which is a big deal in some parts of the world as a major pollutant. This is just a diagram of the city of New York. There are 14 wastewater plants along the 5 boroughs. There are 5 boroughs in New York. This is close to where my campus of Columbia is, and this is where one of the 14 wastewater plants is. In any case, I helped to design 5 of the 14 wastewater plants in the city of New York to remove nitrogen, which is what we were told to do by the state and by the EPA. What we have done since is to, of course, remove pollutants, remove nitrogen, treat the wastewater, treat the sewage, but do so at a very, very low fraction of the energy and the resources that we need to put in. Just to give you an example, when we talk about, let's say, nutrient removal from the wastewater stream, removal to, let's say, by conversion to nitrogen gas, we are talking about 10 to 12% of the city's energy utilization. So we are essentially dumping 10 to 12% of the energy that we use as a city into treating the wastewater, and what we get back is not a big deal. The question is, why are we even doing this? In some parts of the world, we are doing this because the law tells us to do this. So there needs to be some feedback, and I'll try and get back to this later on. Now what we do is we focus a little bit more on how to do the same thing, and And the same thing is basically to achieve sanitation. Same thing is to achieve better human health. Same thing is to basically clean up the water, but do it slightly differently. This is by recognizing that the word wastewater by itself is wrong. There is no wastewater, it is just water. You can call it sewage, but it is not wastewater anymore. On the other hand, it contains a lot of resources. It has a lot of potential commodities that can be extracted and then perhaps even commercialized and perhaps used to offset the cost of treatment. And that is something that we've been doing more and more. This is the same plant which I designed in 2002. This is what we are doing in 2013. We are slightly changing the process. I just put the schematic here because, well, now it's not here. There are a couple of students in Brazil in this image, but anyway, you just have to take my word for it. We are also doing a lot more work outside the US, outside the developed world, where we are actually starting with an empty slate, so to speak. So this gives us a bit more freedom. We're not biased by the regulations for removal to use terms like wastewater. Here the objective is strictly resource recovery and essentially to reduce the burden of sanitation on communities which basically don't even have food. So where do they go to get the money for sanitation? This is an installation in Kumasi, Ghana, which is north of Accra, our flight north of Accra. Here we are taking the fecal sludge from 5 to 10,000 people per day, and we are converting this into methane, which could be used for energy. We're also making chemicals, including biodiesel, which can also be used as a fuel. This is the Atlantic Ocean. This is close to where we are in Ghana. In any case, so this is just a brief background in terms of what we are doing in terms of sanitation. But let's take perhaps many steps back and let's try and identify the challenges. Let's not just jump into sanitation. So the way I define some of the challenges that we are faced with energy, limitation in terms of energy. This is the global society now. We are faced with limitations in terms of clean water. It's not water quantity, it's water quality. We have lots of water. We just can't go take a mug and drink seawater, right? We have water. We are talking about water of a certain quality, which is lacking. We're talking about food insecurity in many parts of the world. We're talking about basic lack of sewage processing and sanitation. We're talking about human health, disease. We're talking about lack of proper education, adequate education. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about demographics, which is not something that a lot of people focus on, but I learned a lot about demographics by speaking to one of your colleagues that well-being School of Public Health, Linda Fried. Thankfully, I could find another challenge to put on the last circle there. You can identify that. In any case, there is also something else compounding many of these challenges. The other challenge which is underlying all of these is that the majority of the world's population is going to live in cities. This, I think, has been documented. This has been speculated. That's fine. We don't know how a city of the future is actually going to look like. That's probably not a bad thing, because perhaps this will prevent us from making the same mistake that we've made in some parts of the world. So we have all of these challenges. We have this challenge to compound several of these. And now this brings us to the question, how do we start addressing some of these challenges? How do we address the energy challenge? How have we addressed the energy challenge? In the US, a few years ago, we tried to grow a lot of corn and use the corn for ethanol. And what happened as a consequence? The price of corn went up, people went hungry. So what did we try to do? We tried to address the energy challenge. Right? And then we made a big mistake with respect to food. And the point here is we just cannot afford to do that. We should not be doing that. This represents what we term a wicked problem. It's a multi-variable, multi-parameter optimization problem. And so we really cannot address these challenges in isolation. We have to address these challenges in conjunction. This is the only way to do it. And I'll give you a few examples today. And so let's get right to it. Let's start by talking about the water cycle, the way we handle the water cycle today. And the reason I bring this is because I firmly believe that by taking a more mature look at the water cycle, we can solve not only the challenge associated with water, but we can solve a few of those other challenges as well. But before we do that, let's take a look at how we use water today. Where do we start? We start here. What is the formula for water? Not a trick question. It's not a trick question. What's the formula for water? We start with H2O. What do we do with H2O? We drink it, we use it for other purposes like showering, wash off. Then what we produce is dirty water, right? We use dirty water, produce wastewater, produce sewage. What is the formula of that stream over there? What is it?
S-H-I-T.
Okay, that's fine. I can balance it. S-H-I-T is on the right-hand side. What's on the left-hand side? It's H2O plus X, right? It's the X. And so to me, this is not exciting at all. I can't do too many things with this. This is all I can do with this. H2O plus X, we can do a lot more because we're talking about many, many more elements. We're talking about a whole suite of possibilities. And it's that H2O plus X, which is actually much more enriched than H2O, right? It contains a lot of energy by itself, it contains a lot of chemicals. What do we do to H2O plus X or SHIT? What do we do? We'll get there. We'll get there. But before we get there, let's bring this conversation back to at least why I'm here to speak, Pedras. I saw two ends of the water cycle. I saw the beginning and the end. I also saw this, which is fascinating. I think it's a common image, which I personally took as well. But in any case, there are a couple of a couple of eye-openers for me at least. This is on the drinking water side. These are a lot of drinking water pipes which have been plumbed and which have been connected. There are pumps here and people are basically getting very good quality drinking water. And this comes originally from Sedai, and then it has been tapped in. And I know a lot of you are architects and artists here, and you have a different perception of beauty. This I like. This to me is beautiful. But in any case, so this is very good. Families are getting water, clean water. There is also disinfection being practiced. Some of us were on a tour where we opened up the water tank and we could actually smell the chlorine. In a sense, this is good because you know that there is disinfection being practiced. But I also heard from our local tour guide that excess chlorination was actually being practiced, which may not be very good for infants, but for adults I think it's okay. So this is okay. This is being done right now. And so in most of the favelas, these disinfection tanks are at some level. But then you know what has happened. People have constructed beyond that level as well. So what we see also on top of these tanks are some more pumps and pipes, and upper stories are still getting very good quality water. This is all fine. And this is a weak attempt at disguising a pump, which is meant to, this is probably not legit by the way, but in any case, this is to provide water. So the positive message on the drinking water side, the H2O side, is that Pedras is okay. It's okay. The quality that they get for drinking, they may not be using it only for drinking, but what is meant for drinking is okay. What comes out of the back end is a bit more grim. So starting in the image. So this is again from our trip. Larissa was kind enough to take some images. So there are sewage pipes coming out of almost each and every household. This we saw. There are PVC pipes coming out of almost each and every house, each and every structure. Sorry. There are sewers, there are manholes. Where does this go? This goes sadly into the river. And this is what is happening. I don't know, I'm probably not sure that you can see this, but this is the sewage which is coming out from these individual pipes in some parts of Pedras. And you can see the water is fairly oxygenated, meaning it's not dark and black. And then once the activity of the organisms inside the river kicks in, the H2O plus X, the X is converted mostly into methane and hydrogen sulfide, and you can see this bubbling out. And this is really not a good thing. What else? And in some houses, there are not even these. In some neighborhoods, there are also not these pipes. There are individual pipes from individual houses just draining directly into the river. So this is not a good picture at all. And so this is probably a much bigger problem that we really need to address. And just for me, just to clarify this was very significant, because on the flight over here, I was really afraid of finding problems on both ends, the drinking water side and the sewage side. I was actually very afraid that each house would be dumping out in an uncontrolled fashion. But what was very positive for me is the existence of this structure. Because once you give me a pipe, I can control what comes out, and that we can do this now. The other positive aspect is that there is no cross connection between the sewage pipe, you see this here, there's no cross connection between this pipe and the drinking water pipe. Now this is quite mind-blowing, because we can't even achieve this in the US. In many, many cases, on many days, the drinking water and the sewage gets cross-connected, and this is when we are told not to drink the tap water. So this is great. So we know now, I think I'm conveying the picture, we know what to solve now, what to go after. It's the sewage that we need to go after. So how do we do this? This is not a trivial task. I think we are here somewhere. We're here. Does anyone know where the two wastewater plants in Rio are, or the bigger plant Rio is? It's near the airport. It's a very well-run plant. I heard once that the walls collapsed and everything came up, but for the most part, it's a very well-run plant. We are here, the plant is there are some mountains. Do we send the wastewater to that plant over there? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so the question, I'm asking a seemingly trivial question, because in the mindset of centralized treatment, centralized wastewater treatment, this is what we will do. What we do in centralized wastewater treatment is we take sewage, we take stuff that we don't need, and we send it to a place which is far away from where people live. This is what is done all over the world. Here at Pedras, we cannot do that, and that's a very good thing. Not be doing that, that's a very good thing. What is actually happening now is also not good. It's just basically draining into this lagoon. If I get that correct, it's mostly draining into this lagoon, and which is also not good. So what can we do? Okay, so what can we do? If we follow the old model, let's assume that we have a centralized wastewater treatment plant. Just come along for the ride for a couple of moments. This is what we do. We build these massive plants, massive tanks. The collective volume of the bioreactor in New York City alone is about 400 million gallons, which is about 1.6 billion liters. That's just the volume of tankage. That's the land that we are also consuming. So what do we do when we talk about wastewater treatment? We separate out the solids. We have tanks for that. Then we send the constituents into a bioreactor. A bioreactor is basically aerated. We provide air into the bioreactor, and what happens is that carbon gets converted into something, nitrogen gets converted into something, and we clean up the wastewater. In some parts of the world, we recycle the bacteria. In some parts of the world, we disinfect the effluent wastewater, and then in some parts of the world, we don't disinfect. What have we done? We have taken H2O plus X, which is now energy rich, chemical rich, commodity rich, and we have come to this point which is acceptable by the Clean Water Act, for instance. That's fine. What else have we done here? We have put in energy, we put in chemicals, we've spent land, we basically treated this as a sink. We're taking something which is already valuable, putting even more, and then dumping it. This is what we're doing. And this is about the energy that goes into the bioreactor is about 60 to 70% of wastewater utilities overall energy bill. And as I said, if you add up everything which is going on, let's say in some parts of the developed world, this is about 12% of the national energy consumption. You're getting clean water, but it comes at a cost, and it doesn't make too much sense. And I'll give you some examples where this doesn't work. This is a plant in Accra. This was funded by the World Bank. It's a state-of-the-art anaerobic reactor. Anaerobic plant. It's called an anaerobic sludge reactor reactor. Produces methane. It's a very clean plant. See, it's very nice. Tanks are beautiful. It's long. This is the Atlantic Ocean, where this plant should discharge into. Can any of you see the fecal sludge plume here? If I point it out, this is from you basically go out into the Atlantic Ocean and then you fly back in, and it's a small airport. So this is what you get. So what is happening here? We have a plant, yeah, it's right in Accra, and where is this coming from? Okay, well I didn't I couldn't understand this anyway. And then we were actually taken to the plant, so I climbed up on the digester and took a look at what was going on. So this plant is clean because there's nothing coming into the plant. This plant is empty. Okay, now you start thinking, right? Accra, by the way, is a very well laid out city. There's a very nice plan for the sewage to actually come into the plant. There's a central zone where there's no wastewater, there's fecal sludge. So the trucks collect fecal sludge, they go to the centralized location, they drain the fecal sludge, which then should go here. Accra, like Rio, also has a slight traffic problem. And truck drivers get paid by the number of trucks that they discharge every day, that they transport every day. The truck drivers say, well, I just want to make my money. I go to the highway and dump everything into the ocean. They get paid. That's the fecal sludge over there, the plant is empty. So this is beautiful centralized wastewater treatment, fecal sludge treatment infrastructure that's not working for completely another reason that one could not even imagine. So in any case, there are many, many more examples like this. But realizing limitations, what can we do? Can we take another look at the same gadget and say, well, is there something else that can be done? The answer is yes. We talked about H2O plus X. I just point out what can be recovered where. We can recover chemicals and energy right with the raw sewage. Right with the raw sewage. If we have the resources, we can go through a framework at the end. We can actually extract chemicals and energy from reactors. We can extract energy from the flow in some parts of the world. I'm saying 1.2 billion gallons of water flow per day. We can get the energy from the flow. I would say get the flow energy here, don't put the flow energy here because you'll be dispersing pathogens as well. So get it over here. And then some of these other streams you can get chemicals and energy. And then what happens? Remember, we stopped talking about wastewater treatment a few slides ago. We're talking about resource recovery now. What happens is that water quality becomes the bonus. We stop talking about wastewater treatment. We stop talking about sewage treatment. That is sustainability. That's one way to sustainability. We just stop talking about it. Okay, water energy nexus. Yesterday I was introduced to the fact more and more that there is no water, there is no energy. And you see it especially this summer, right? There have been very low rains. And for a country dependent on hydroelectric power, this is not a very good thing. So again, there are links that can be made for water energy. So the overall upshot of the schematic is that water is required to produce energy, sure, but energy and resources are also required to produce quality water, right? That's fine. And this is a schematic which is widely used. I think one of the federal agencies came up with the schematic, and this is fine. And there are two things which are somewhat puzzling here. Where is the wastewater treatment plant in the schematic? You see it in the center of the picture? It's in one sad little corner over there. The other, and that's something that we're trying to go away from. The other thing which is somewhat puzzling, and perhaps the granularity is not there, all water streams are treated equally. We don't need potable quality water to wash our cars, do we? We don't need potable quality water to irrigate our farms. That is stupid. You're putting H2 onto a farm without any nutrients. That's stupid. So water is not the same everywhere. So now what we're thinking about is a refinery that is fed with sewage, and it's basically a water quality machine or a resource recovery machine, getting out commodities that are needed and used exactly where they are actually needed. This also lends itself not only to a centralized wastewater treatment plant stuck somewhere in a bad neighborhood, mostly around the world, very bad neighborhood outside. We are now talking about a distributed, decentralized model. Whereas even let's say the wall collapses in a treatment plant, there are other plants where this can be treated. Now New York City, by the way, even though the flows are amazingly high, 1.2 billion gallons. What is this? 4 billion liters per day. We are talking about 14 plants on the grid. 3 years ago, there was a fire in a plant near Columbia. What we were able to do is take the flow to another plant. Another one of those 14 plants will be fine. If this had happened, let's say in the city of Boston, the city of Chicago, they have one big structure. They fail. People go to jail right away. And there are several merits of doing this in a distributed, decentralized fashion. Again, thankfully you cannot, from Rio Las Pedras all the way near the airport, treat it right there, and let's see what else we can do with it. This is not Star Trek, this is not science fiction, this is actually being done. That's a building in downtown, all the way downtown Manhattan. This is called the Solar Building. What they're actually doing is they are taking the wastewater to the basement and they're just recycling the water. They don't drink the water, but they use it for urban agriculture on the roof. This also reduces the load on the centralized wastewater treatment plant. And so, and this is a lot more energy effective. I saw some buildings in Rio Las Pedras. The parallels are there. You can do this. In New York City, I would never put a treatment plant in the basement anymore after Sandy. Perhaps you should either because there's flooding prospects as well. But this can be done. The very factors that we consider somewhat to be negative, too many people living around. This to me, too many people in a dense cluster is very good because it gives me the concentration that I can work with. I think Larissa also mentioned the same thing. People living together is a good thing in many, many ways as well. Other ways as well. There are questions in terms of does decentralization truly enhance resilience? I think predominantly the answer is yes. What about scales of economy? This is something that we truly need to understand because we probably should not be putting in a system for every person. That probably not going to work. But again, we can decentralize stuff to the next step. Okay, so what do we, coming back here, what do we do? This is out. This is out. On the other hand, just dumping sewage is also probably not the right thing to do. We need some barriers. I've discussed an alternate with Keith and Raul a little bit. We also realized that there's some very expensive real estate coming up somewhere here, and they're probably dumping everything back into the lagoon. Perhaps, if we truly consider Rio Las Pedras as a mining community, as a resource recovery community, perhaps they can also contribute to improvements of the streams coming from the other side, but they can make money charging for the treatment, they can make money on the back end selling the commodities that they actually get. So maybe this works, maybe this doesn't, but this probably could be an option. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else. And this is very similar to the model of Dharavi, Bombay. Dharavi, Bombay, I heard that Rio Las Pedras is 60 billion or 30 billion per year economy. All favelas. Dharavi, I think, generates a multiple of that just by itself. It's a completely resource recovery community, complete resource recovery. Probably there are some limitations here. You can't get vehicles in here, but again, the model, the president is there to do something. Okay, then the question, now we can talk concepts, but we need to get back to reality. Let's talk some real numbers. We've been talking about what to recover. Let's talk about energy recovery to begin with. Well, the first question is there enough energy in sewage? Let's start with the left-hand side. For typical domestic sewage, there is about 2,500 kilowatt hours per million gallons. And I'm talking million gallons because I'm still talking dilute wastewater. When you talk about the wastewater in Rio Las Pedras, this is going to be an order of magnitude higher because here you're not diluting the sewage, you're just running it up. Dilution, maybe I should explain this. I can explain this by asking questions again. How much water do we drink every day? 3 liters, 1 gallon, let's say, 1 gallon. Okay. How much wastewater do we produce per day? How much water do we consume per day? In Brazil? 25 liters per day. No, it's a lot higher than that. It's a lot higher than that. I got the number from somebody, and you can tell me that this is wrong. I heard 300 liters per day. 300 liters per day. And how much are you drinking? 3 liters a day. What is the factor of dilution? 100 to 1. 100 to 1. In the favelas, the 100 to 1 dilution is not happening. The sewage goes directly into the pipe and out. That's why I'm saying you can add 2 zeros to the back end. There's a lot more energy here. A lot more energy here. Okay. What is the energy needed for treatment? When I say treatment, I'm looking at my old short-sighted, old-fashioned model of removing everything, putting in energy. This is the amount of energy that I need. So if you go to some other countries, there's a 1-to-1 match. So you can just about break even. But here we're not talking about old-fashioned treatment, we're talking about resource recovery. Then that number goes down by a factor of 3. Now this is making a lot more sense. There's a lot more energy than you need even to treat, even if you ignore the couple of zeros that you can add if you want to, or at least 1 zero that you can add. So in this setting, so many people living together, concentrated waste, you have more energy than you need to even treat if you wanted to treat. And so this is possible. There are communities in the US, one in upstate New York state, and then one near San Francisco, which are actually doing this. They are actually importing biomass. They are importing waste. They are doing this. They are importing waste. They are anaerobically digesting the waste. They are making so much energy that they are running their whole system, and they are selling energy back into the grid. And we have to see whether this is possible, but again, these are the types of calculations which are needed. Now, what do we do with the energy? Some of you remember we had, this is Manhattan, it's unrecognizable, because we had someone from park a couple of years ago, this is Sandy, and an entire neighborhood got wiped out, there was no power. You know, New York City moves very quickly, but this was astounding. We had a new neighborhood overnight. New neighborhood was so close, out of power. We were up there, Colombia's up there. We didn't suffer at all. My reactors were all running. Not the same side. But in any case, in the financial district, there was a building, 2 Gold Street. At one point, this was the most expensive rental in the country. I'm told again, 800 apartments. Completely blacked out. Completely blacked out. So if we just took the human waste and the food waste and converted this to methane, putting in all the inefficiencies that are associated with methane, what would we get? We would get 1 bulb per apartment for 1 day. On the human waste and food waste for 1 day. So with storage, you probably could light the whole building up. And this could be done again in a sustained fashion. And this is the worst of the worst. This is the lowest hanging fruit. Methane, dirty methane getting converted to electricity, and we could still do that. So that's energy. What else can we recover? We can recover nutrients. We can recover nitrogen and phosphorus. So to me, when I look at sewage or fecal sludge or wastewater, it's 3 things. It's carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Carbon can go to energy or more, and then we have nitrogen and phosphorus. So this is the amount of carbon, organic carbon, that we get, that we produce as a city. In the city of New York, every day, about 2,000 tons of organic carbon every day. I just put a questionnaire observation state. What form is this carbon coming out? It's coming out in the form of charcoal. It's the same thing. Charcoal or diamond, same thing. Charcoal is more realistic. So we have organic carbon, which we're making methane from. We have nutrients. We have the potential to produce 300 tons of nitrogen and 60 tons of phosphorus per day. And what is even better is this nitrogen is in the form of the nitrogen which we need in fertilizer. It's not nitrogen gas, it's not nitrate. It is in the form of fertilizer that we buy. Phosphorus is again in the form of phosphorus fertilizer that we buy. Phosphorus is another story. Phosphorus is a finite resource. It is, if you read some accounts, which I think are exaggerated, phosphorus is going to run out before oil does. Phosphorus is mined, and we have the potential to recover this. Right now we are not, we're just dumping it back. This is what we're doing. What else can we do with the nutrients? What do we do with the nutrients? There's the direct connection to food. Instead of taking food, enriching it, and dumping it, and then make for fertilizer, what we can do is we can use food waste and human waste. We can make fertilizer. This is actually being done in New York. And for those of you from Colombia, this is the land over the gym, over the Dodge, and we are growing vegetables here. So this is urban farming. From the food waste, where do we get the food waste? We get it from the Carlton cafeteria, and we are converting this to fertilizer and energy. I use the energy to run my reactors, and this I give it to students. This is also being done in Chicago. A lot of abandoned buildings are now being taken over by city governments, including Brooklyn and New York City, and they are being used for urban agriculture. Right now, the fertilizer is still being purchased, but now you can see the grid. You now start to connect the dots. Fertilizers can be generated internally and fed, and they can be fed to these urban farms. Okay, it's carbon, nutrients. What else can we do? When we provide better sanitation, what do we do? we're actually doing something which is not very often discussed. We work with an organization called the Environmental Defense Fund. It's a very good organization that is actually primarily responsible for getting the ban on a lot of pesticides in the US. So we work with their scientists. We go all around the world looking at the greenhouse gas impact of sanitation. And we found, just to summarize this image, there are two principal greenhouse gases that come out of sanitation or lack of sanitation. We saw one of them. The river was bubbling with methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. It's about 25 times as bad as CO2. The other greenhouse gas that comes out is nitrous oxide. It's 300 times as bad as CO2. So CO2 is not even in the picture. It's methane and nitrous oxide. If you don't provide adequate sanitation, in addition to all the other negatives, what we are generating are hotspots of greenhouse gases. And you saw this, some of you saw this for yourselves. So when we start to perform interventions to improve water quality by providing sanitation services, we are improving water quality, improving a lot of other things. We're also improving air quality. Greenhouse gases, if you trade nitrous oxide and methane, you can multiply the amount of methane by 25, you can multiply the amount of nitrous oxide by 300, you can multiply the money you get back for carbon credits as well. And that money you can put back into the favelas, that money you can put back into the treatment system. So this is also another resource that can be recovered if a cap and trade system exists. This doesn't exist in some countries, it does in some other countries. So these are some examples of what you can recover in a fairly targeted fashion. How do we do this? Again, when I think about sewage, I think about carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and just to go into a bit detail, the first thing that we can recover is carbon. And I say first because the rates, the ease of carbon recovery is quite high. We can go to methane, we can go to chemicals. We can recover, we have to recover phosphorus, and we have to recover nitrogen in some places. And this is all good. And ultimately what happens is indeed we get clean water, we get all the positive attributes associated with clean water, but then we also get some other things which if commercialized properly can feed back into the system as well. And this is something that we have to be very careful about. We can't produce chemicals in the middle of Africa, but maybe we can produce methane and still use it. Okay, now that's where my skills end, and this is can go in 2 minutes. Everything that I can basically put. This is a systems view of Pedras. This is a supermarket. This is treatment system 1, recovery system 1, 2, and 3. And perhaps this will look different, but this is where we are in terms of our thinking, at least. But that system will only work if we know what is coming in. So we need to characterize the loads, we need to include possibly food waste, and then if you give me this information, I can design this recovery system. Recovery endpoints can be energy, can be nutrients. We need to identify the location, of course. And then we need this. Without this, nothing works. Sustained operation and monitoring. It took me 3 years in Kumasi to get that system up and running, and then the funding ran out, so we shut down the system. But the students are actually now at Columbia working on building another system. But this has to happen locally. But I strongly believe, based on what I'm saying, that this can actually happen in this country. Just to give you an example, this is the centralized treatment system near the airport. And what they were doing, this system is also not running in Rio right now. They were actually making biodiesel, bio-oil, and biochar from the sewage sludge. So if you have any questions, go and talk to this guy. He runs the plant. This system is shut down though, but there is expertise within the country already, close by. Fine, so I've been making a pitch for resource recovery. Maybe you can get some reality here. You can't solve all problems with resource recovery. So again, where do I begin? So I tried to divide the world into 3 parts: the developed, the developing, and the underdeveloped. This is from Wikipedia. So you have Russia on all 3. It's wrong. Anyway, so what do we have in the developed world? What typifies the developed world? We have good food security, that's why this is in green. We have good food security. There's good technology and engineering background and education, that's there, the developed world. The questions are, what do we do with the carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and disinfection? We have to disinfect. We have to biologically stabilize everything, otherwise none of this matters. We have pathogens flying around, none of this matters. So the answer to disinfection is always provide disinfection. What do we do with carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus? The answer to phosphorus is always recover phosphorus. What do we do with carbon and nitrogen? In the developed world, people are not dying of hunger for the most part, if they prefer. You don't have to recover the nitrogen, and indeed, in the developed world, I cannot come up with an economic case for nitrogen recovery. What we can do is provide these two and then go ahead and recover the carbon. Carbon is more difficult to do, but since we have good technology, we can actually do this in the developed world. So this is my framework for the developed world. Let's jump all the way to the other end of the spectrum. What do we have in some of the underdeveloped economies? We have very poor food security. Technology and engineering education is really not very high. What do we do? Again, the answer to disinfection and phosphorus is yes. Yes, absolutely. What do we do with nitrogen? Indeed, recover the nitrogen because then we can actually feed people. We can grow crops and feed people. We need to get energy before we feed people. No, let's feed the people, then we can go to the energy. For me, the most excitement resides in the middle. We have the BRICS nations, including South Africa. What do we have here? We have food security, not as bad, not as good. What do we do with disinfection? Yes. What do we do with phosphorus? Yes. What separates this is we have fantastic technology and engineering. Look at this room. Look at I have some students also. Look at this is really positive. So what we can do now is we can recover the nitrogen to improve food security, but we can actually go make the jump and actually recover everything. So this is where the stimulation is. This is where the opportunity is. And so for me, when I walked into Pedras, seeing what I saw, it was I was quite excited. In any case, in terms of cities of the future, this is how a city looked a long time ago. There was a center which was productive. This was the core. How did we get this photograph? There was some photograph. Anyway, we had this. This is New York City, central core, surrounded by not so productive. Perhaps this is how a city of the future looks like. But we are, make no mistake about this, we are moving towards a more distributed, decentralized model. This is out. This is completely out. What do we have to do? We have to provide better. We have to stop thinking along the old model. Centralized treatment by itself is not going to work. Laws, regulations which promote removal rather than recovery are not going to work. In some parts of the world, laws are not there or they're not being followed. So this is exciting. We can go back and change things. Education. Till 2 years ago, I used to teach a course called Environmental Biochemical Processes, Wastewater Treatment. Now I call it Resource Recovery. In fact, this semester, in School of Public Health, I'm offering a course on design of sanitation systems for the developing world. And it's going to be about recovery. So a lot of other things will change as well. And so today, cities are sinks for water, energy, food. You get something back for it. Cities of the future, maybe they look like this. They are not sinks anymore. They're actually factories. They're actually sources for a lot of things. Thank you. I took more than my time, but thank you.
Thank you very much. The wonderful presentations. Very inspiring. Bom, vou passar para o português, so maybe you should do the things. A gente vai abrir para algumas perguntas, mas eu queria antes colocar algumas perguntas para a gente tentar avançar um pouquinho mais na fala de cada um. Eu adorei que a Gina mencionou a Jane Jacobs, que eu acho que todos nós somos fãs dela. E a Jane Jacobs fala muito sobre grandes investimentos, né, que podem causar cataclismas, na verdade, nas cidades. Tem uma coisa importante que eu acho que está acontecendo no Brasil agora, que eu gostaria de talvez ouvir um pouquinho sobre você, desculpa. A gente tem uma taxa de motorização muito alta, porque a gente tem uma parte grande da população que passou a ter renda, passou a ter uma questão... Desculpa. A gente tem um aumento muito grande na taxa de obesidade entre jovens.
A gente tem também um aumento muito grande na taxa de obesidade entre jovens. Então, uma pesquisa recente mostrou que jovens entre 13 e 15 anos, 78% deles fazem menos do que 2 horas de exercício por dia, ou nenhum exercício por dia. Andando em Rio das Pedras, a gente vê como cada vez tem mais carro, muita gente jovem, a tendência é que as pessoas caminhem menos. Então, você passou os últimos dias, eu acho que o Andrew também andando em Rio das Pedras, conversando com as pessoas. Você conversou com o pessoal da Fiocruz também, que é um instituto importante de Public Health do Rio. O que você acha que Rio das Pedras tem que pode ajudar a aumentar a caminhabilidade? Então, é o uso da rua, uma atividade física, mas não somente, mas que contribua para a saúde. E o que você acha que precisam ser as questões que mais precisam ser trabalhadas para que as pessoas, de fato, estejam mais na rua e que isso tenha um impacto benéfico, tanto nas questões de taxa de obesidade quanto da circulação em geral?
Supported or not supported by streets. Walking actually has sort of a dual nature. On the one hand, for some people, they're stuck with walking. They don't have other options, they don't have cars, and so they're actually what we call captive walkers. So they're going to walk, even if it's unsafe, even if it's unpleasant. They're unable to respond to an environment that they don't enjoy by not walking. And so I think for that population, there's an opportunity to make walking a better experience, to make it safe, I think becomes a priority. There are other populations for which walking is better viewed as an amenity, as a leisure activity. And for those populations, they have other alternatives. They can get into another form of transportation. And it's really, in those populations where changing the environment may be more likely to encourage walking. I don't think that means that's the only place we should invest, but I think there's a difference in the focus. And I think in a place like Pedras, where we saw a lot of barriers to enjoying being in the environment, and potentially the safety in the environment in terms of safety of traffic, and from other things as well. Like, I think that that's really got to be the priority. And even if that safety doesn't increase the number of pedestrians, given the other changes that are going on in the environment, if it makes pedestrians safer, that's still the right direction to push the system.
It was actually really interesting during the megamix. I forget which of the architecture students it was having a conversation with the school children there about public transportation and use of cars. And ironically, public transportation promotes walking. So you don't think about necessarily that if I can take the bus or the train, that somehow that would promote walking. But what it does promote is freedom from the automobile. And as soon as you have an automobile, walking declines. So even if you're just walking from the subway stop or the bus stop, that's more walking than you would do if you decide to transition to a car. Just everything becomes car dominated. So the question that the architecture student posed to the school children was, would you prefer to have a car, or if public transportation was on time, air conditioned, and reliable, would you prefer to take public transportation? And growing up in America, everybody wanted a car. Every 16-year-old wanted a car. And I was kind of holding my breath, waiting for what the school children would say, whether they wanted a car. And there must have been 8, 10 school children. And they agreed they wouldn't want a car. They would prefer public transportation if it was a high quality or a higher quality experience. And I was kind of kind of blown away by this because it's completely opposite of what I was expecting. But I think it's a good sign that somehow, like, the seduction of the private automobile and the supposed freedom of the road that overran the U.S. Doesn't seem, on my small sample of 80 kids in one schoolyard, doesn't seem to have captivated them the way that it captivated America's youth. Public transportation, ironically, promotes pedestrian active transport because it frees us from having a car. And once we have a car, we become locked into a lifestyle that is ever more less pedestrian, less active transportation. And once most of the population is locked into having a car, we can spread our supermarkets further away, we can spread our amenities further away, so road miles start going up. We spend more time in the car, and sitting in a car is totally sedentary. And we get locked into this cycle. So I also think public transportation as a way to promote physical activity is a great idea.
Queria também fazer só pedir o Cartier para contar um pouquinho para a gente se você tem exemplos de outros países onde esses sistemas foram implementados, então países talvez em algum lugar na Índia ou na Ásia, países na mesma situação do Brasil, como é que a comunidade estava envolvida, então qual era o marco institucional disso, quais são os atores que têm que se envolver para investir na implantação de um sistema de tratamento e até o final, né? Então até a produção da commodity que você pode ter no final. Quais são os atores que devem estar envolvidos nisso? Como é que a gente deveria pensar nisso no caso de Rio das Pedras?
In terms of examples of recovery systems, outside the developed world, one of the better examples is actually in South Africa, where again I think South Africa in many ways is quite close to countries like Brazil, Russia, as well, and India also. So in South Africa, there are many interconnected issues again. One is crime in some urban centers in South Africa. One is lack of sanitation, and lack of sanitation primarily impacts women and children. There are children who women don't feel safe to use public facilities or semi-public facilities. And children just they actually don't even have access to toilets, so they basically don't, let's say, move their bowels. And this is just very unhealthy. So what actually happened was, in some parts of Johannesburg, there were actually community decentralized anaerobic digesters were in place. But again, I'm sorry if I trivialized anaerobic digestion. This is not easy. These digesters were put into place, the system was run, but after some time this really did not work. It just became an upside for just about everything. So this is the negative example. In terms of success stories, there are many communities in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, to the extent that I know of, where there are community anaerobic digesters. Again, this is a very low-tech kind of a system. It's just almost a live ditch in the ground where there are a set of families which basically put the human waste, animal waste and human waste, and all they use is the methane. They just use it directly piped to their stoves, and they use it for cooking now. And this works very well. They don't have to clean the biogas that comes out. They don't have to do anything. It's a very low-tech system. And so the connection here is that again, one of the similarities is are the grids of the other spectrums. So we can imagine maybe for a few streets or maybe part of the community. I think this is what Pedro even sketched out. There are multiple, let's say, digesters put in place for or maybe gas, or maybe other endpoints. I don't fully understand the system. We need to go back in. I think you brought this up the other day. If we now start providing gas for burners, what happens to the company which is actually providing gas right now? Are there any conflicts that we are creating? So this is something that needs to be taken into account. These examples that I gave you were there was nothing interesting, and perhaps that's where it worked in one case, and then it fell apart for another reason.
Só para depois eu te perguntar mais uma coisa para vocês, mas só para dar uma continuidade a essa pergunta, o custo de implantação, o custo inicial, capital costs, para a implantação, geralmente quem é que é o principal ator envolvido? Vem de algum fundo da comunidade, assim, não sei, em alguns países da África subsaariana, esse custo vem da comunidade, algum fundo, ou ele vem de alguma agência internacional de desenvolvimento, ou vem do governo? Como é que tem sido a sua experiência nesse sentido?
So in sub-Saharan Africa, the communities themselves pay for it. They didn't rely on any aid. It's really, these are small systems. There are 4 or 5 families, and they dig a ditch. And the engineer actually was the same guy that we hired to build our system in Ghana. And so it's all almost like a family enterprise. So they didn't rely on any external funding. South Africa was struggle.
E eu acho que então vou fazer uma última pergunta para a Gina, para o Andrew, e aí a gente vai abrir para outros participantes. Bom, então vocês passaram esses últimos dias conversando na escola, com os alunos, com algumas agências de saúde pública no Rio. Vocês conseguiram ter algum entendimento sobre como que o ambiente construído impacta, no momento, a saúde pública de Rio das Pedras? Quais são as principais tendências que vocês veem, as principais tendências problemáticas lá em termos de saúde pública?
So it seems like there's a range of issues that we've seen, and I think what you pointed out before about this trend towards cars and some potential problematic large projects, I think those are open questions for whether those are going to lead to more future obesity, more problems that we should be trying to anticipate now. It seems like there are some key issues currently around flooding and dengue, as well as diabetes. I understand to be a problem. It sounds like there's a tiered system with some of the public services where there's a very minimal availability in the public sector for healthcare or education, and then people who have resources can find better services. And so I think that that separation itself can be quite significantly problematic. I think on the other side, there's a lot of social cohesion that we saw, which we know that local people and social cohesion and themselves be buffers and sources of resilience in some ways that we can deal with future challenges. So I have a lot of hope that things are going to be getting better.
I guess I want to be cautious, having only spent 4 days here and maybe a total of 4 hours touring favelas. So I feel I know sort of the nano of the nano of the nano of what is really happening here. So we came with really to try to begin our understanding of the conversation. We do a lot of work on food access and how there are neighborhoods in New York City where if you wanted to eat healthy, eat a banana or broccoli or leafy greens, it'd be very, very difficult to do so just because there are no stores that sell that kind of food. And Gina and I live in the same neighborhood in Manhattan, and the supermarket that we went to on the way to Rio de Pedras, we were both kind of impressed that it was actually better than the supermarkets that are in our neighborhoods in Manhattan. And we took a brief wander around the supermarkets to see what kind of produce are being sold, what kind of foods are being sold, and there were fruits and vegetables in a way that we sometimes don't see in our own supermarkets in our neighborhood. What I did see was a lot of processed food from large food mega corporations. The thing that struck me was that we have Nestle crisps, Nestle Crunch. So Nestle Crunch is a candy bar in the U.S. and it appears to be sold here as breakfast cereal. So there's the Nestle Crunch cereal. And in terms of food products that lead to obesity, it's these processed, high energy dense foods that are palatable, appeal to growing incomes, that are seems to be central to obesity crises that countries go through. But on the other hand, we were both kind of really impressed with some of the produce quality that we saw, especially in comparison to where I buy my produce. It struck me that some of the construction materials that we saw may be problematic. I don't know much about construction materials, but it seemed like I saw some asbestos maybe. So that could be an issue to think about. But again, I feel like this is my first baby step to understanding the built environment, the social environment are real. So maybe I have more thoughts as I continue to
Ok, great. Acho que eu vou abrir para perguntas. Acredito que gostaria de fazer uma pergunta eu queria saber se você já teve a oportunidade de visitar outras favelas, além de Pedras. A favela de Pedras é uma favela que é plana. E eu saber pergunta é porque eu quero saber se você considera os rios que geralmente atravessam as favelas, principalmente aquelas que são localizadas nas encostas, se você considera uma possibilidade de usar os rios como sendo fazer as estações de tratamento nos próprios rios. Porque se você tem os rios assim, nas encostas, eles têm uma morfologia que já poderiam facilitar isso. Você mostrou naquelas suas imagens ali as descargas diretas, né, que acontecem das casas para os rios. A gente tem nas morfologias dos rios, e encosta você tem aquelas corredeiras, aquelas pequenas corredeiras, depois você tem os poções, e assim, você poderia usar isso, talvez, né, com auxílio de plantas, auxílio das próprias pedras ou outros materiais de fora no próprio rio. Que você falasse um pouco sobre isso, se é possível, se você é possível.
This is a very interesting concept. As we were actually even looking at Pedras, there are some differences in elevation which lead to localized turbulence. And what localized turbulence does is it provides aeration. And actually, one of the students also came up with this idea of providing some localized turbulence either in the XY direction, or we could even go in the Z direction. So that can be done. The answer is yes. The question then becomes, how much air do we put in? How much contamination will that air remove? And we can do this calculation very quickly. The saturation concentration of oxygen at 20 degrees Celsius is 8.7 milligrams oxygen per liter. At 30 degrees Celsius, it's lower. Even let's say it's 8 milligrams oxygen per liter. 8 milligrams oxygen per liter is going to remove 8 milligrams organic carbon as BOD per liter. What is coming in is probably going to be 1000 milligram BOD per liter. So it's not going to be enough. So the answer is yes. I think we need to look at barriers like this, but they will not be the primary barrier. I suspect given the loading that we have, we still have to put some primary barriers, but then this can be the polishing step. It doesn't really matter on the elevation. You can only get so much oxygen into a volume flow. That's what limits. But this is a good polishing step. So 3 people have come up with this idea, has to be correct.
Eu sou Marcelo, já apresentei ontem, em causa da Prefeitura do Rio. Vou apresentar aqui minha amiga, que é a Mônica Bahia, também da Prefeitura do Rio, da Secretaria de Urbanismo. Ela é do setor de macroplanejamento. Bem, propus aqui o conceito de que uma alta densidade seria uma das virtudes da favela de Rio das Pedras, por conseguinte da tipologia das nossas favelas. A gente entende que hoje o alto adensamento dessas favelas é um dos problemas a ser resolvido. Tá? Então, deixou de ser uma virtude para ser realmente um problema, porque a forma em que se dá essa densidade não é mais só uma densidade populacional, é uma densidade construtiva. E o desafio maior, e isso para então, as pessoas que pensam nas intervenções em Rio das Pedras ou qualquer outra favela da Zona Sul, da nossa, onde tem uma demanda maior, moradia, é manter o existente, né? Respeitar o que as pessoas construíram, da forma que elas construíram. E isso também me parece que é o consenso, né? Eu acho que isso também tem que ser repensado. Da forma como as pessoas construíram, manter aquelas altas densidades e os padrões necessários de qualidade de vida, de salubridade. Esse é o grande desafio de Rio das Pedras. Uma alta verticalização, né? Uma proximidade muito grande entre as construções e uma desregulação aí em relação aos parâmetros construtivos e a dificuldade toda que nós temos para fiscalizar. Então, manter qualidade urbana com alta densidade, uma tipologia como as nossas favelas, isso é um caso de Rio das Pedras, em algumas áreas de Rio das Pedras, onde a ocupação é espontânea. Eu vejo até a questão do carro, pode ser uma virtude também, a valorização do passeio, mas eu não sei o quanto justo é as pessoas também não terem nem a opção de poderem ter um automóvel, porque elas não têm como acessar. Talvez o embasamento de comércio e substituindo a garagem pode ser causa e consequência disso, né? Porque uma vez não tendo a possibilidade de ter um automóvel, é utilizado como uma unidade comercial. E a gente tem assim, cerca de 90 vilas, né? Que é uma das virtudes, porém as vilas, elas também têm larguras muito estreitas e que não permite, pela alta verticalização, condições satisfatórias, vem de aeração e de insolação. O uso intensivo do ar-condicionado, o uso intensivo da energia por conta da baixa insolação, todos os problemas de saúde que têm relação com a alta densidade, como que nós poderemos manter condições satisfatórias de Rio das Pedras, mantendo as condições hoje construtivas, sem pensar em desrespeitar o direito adquirido das pessoas que já construíram suas casas. Isso aí, a solução é que nós temos que dar, para isso. Estamos lá para pensar isso. Bom, enfim, não é uma pergunta.
Rio das Pedras is a flood-prone area, and with the lack of sanitation infrastructure and how it gets worse with the flood, what would you suggest be the first step to mitigate the damages, or to minimize the damages because of that?
So in Rio das Pedras, the water infrastructure is actually very similar to what we have in very old cities in the world. The sewage and the rainwater go in the same pipe. We call this a combined sewer system, same in many cities. I'm not really sure that this can be changed at this point. I think Rahul and I were also talking about this. We probably need to control what gets into the combined sewers in terms of extraneous material, like solids, like trash. I would say this is something that we can do right now. This is probably the least destructive thing that we can do right now, and of course we need to quantify what happens. Over longer term, we are looking at the river and we are thinking about barriers for sanitation, but we could also conceive of some barriers for flow going the other way around from the rivers back into the streets. So permeable barriers, one providing treatment, but also as almost a check valve for the flood. There are probably many other options. Just to actually, can I just answer your question? I just thought one more example, Clarissa.
Yes.
The system where these decentralized treatment systems work. This is actually a prison in I forget which African country, but a prison where the prisoners are actually taught, educated in terms of resource recovery. Of course, the government pays for the system. But this is an example of actually where just production of methane works.
Maybe not in exactly answering your question, but at least in sort of framing the trouble, is that we may be in a place where everybody's moving to optimize their own situation, just sort of trying to get to the local optimization, the local best situation that they can have. And it's a challenge to actually get to the best possible situation without first making things worse. And I think we see that across a lot of the different ways that we would like to improve a place that's already built, that already has people living there. I think as we see in Rio more broadly, the construction that's with the intent of making transportation better in the long term is making it worse and having more traffic problems in the short term. So I think it's just a tension that we have to think about and figure out if there are ways we can kind of bridge this optimization process as we try to get to a better situation.
Alguém mais quer fazer o Ninguém? Então vamos fechar. Muito obrigada, Sartik, Gina e Andrew, pelas ótimas apresentações, e aos participantes também. Não sei fazer. Tá. Então vou passar a palavra para o Pedro.
Bom, agradecer a vocês também, agradecer a Clarice, agradecer a todos, aos palestrantes que não estão aqui hoje. Enfim, isso foi uma série de 3 dias especificamente dedicados ao Rio das Pedras com essas palestras, e mais um dia dedicado ao Rio de Janeiro de uma maneira geral. Eu acho que através desses dias, através dos temas que foram tratados, a gente conseguiu abarcar um amplo espectro de assuntos e temáticas que são importantes para se pensar sobre esse território, mas eu acho também, para além desses territórios, para pensar como sobre a urbanização das cidades, os modelos de urbanização como um todo. Eu acho que no primeiro dia a gente tirou a lição de que o Rio de Janeiro uma cidade que está passando por uma transformação profunda. E por estar passando uma transformação profunda, é preciso que a gente imagine outros instrumentos e outras práticas que apontem para um futuro melhor. Então, é muito importante, assim, é claro que a gente tem uma série de conhecimentos adquiridos ao longo do tempo, mas a gente precisa também buscar novas tecnologias, buscar novos desenvolvimentos para essa nova cidade que o Rio de Janeiro pretende ser. Na terça-feira, a gente teve uma palestra focada em favela e desenvolvimento. Essa é uma questão crucial, uma questão fundamental para se pensar as favelas, que é se pensar as favelas a partir da potência das suas dinâmicas e não pensar mais as favelas como um espaço de carência. O espaço de carência você corrige erros. A gente não está interessado apenas em corrigir erros, a gente está interessado em investir nas potências como agente de transformação também. Se questionou também os modelos de urbanização. O que é o modelo ideal? Acho que um pouco esse slide quer dizer. Quais são os possíveis modelos que a cidade pode oferecer? A gente não pode esquecer que o modelo alternativo às favelas hoje é o Minha Casa Minha Vida, que carrega tantos problemas quanto a favela carrega. Então, é preciso contextualizar. Eu acho que uma outra questão importante, e que essa questão foi colocada hoje, é pensar na questão dos sistemas. Pensar como a articulação dos diferentes sistemas econômicos, dos diferentes sistemas de infraestrutura podem ser pensados, como a organização existente, como as instituições podem participar para que hajam engenharias capazes não só de resolver os problemas, mas capazes de manter esses problemas. Muitas vezes nós arquitetos pensamos na solução imediata dos problemas, mas não pensamos como se dará a transformação disso através do tempo. E eu acho que finalmente, acho que é um comentário mais pessoal meu, existem muitos mitos e muitos dogmas sobre as favelas, de ambos os lados. Dos lados dos detratores das favelas e do lado dos defensores das favelas. Visões apaixonadas e antagônicas são as piores visões que a gente precisa ter. Então é preciso dar um passo atrás e pensar, acho que principalmente na questão dos detratores, é mais fácil falar sobre isso, pensar nas possibilidades, nos aspectos de sustentabilidade, dinâmicas da favela social, etc. Mas acho que até no papel das pessoas que estão acostumadas a pensar na favela, acho que a gente também tem hoje uma posição muito de intocável. Por intocável, eu não quero dizer de maneira nenhuma, não estou falando de processos de remoção, não estou falando de processos de arrasamento, mas de processos de transformação urbana que demandam, sim, alguns desconfortos individuais. O bem coletivo demanda, às vezes, alguns desconfortos individuais para produzir transformações para o todo. Então, acho que a gente também tem que ter muito cuidado, aonde a gente pode, quais são aqueles elementos que a gente precisa tocar para que isso possa efetivamente ser transformado. Acho que eu estou reagindo um pouco ao seu comentário, porque, evidentemente, a densidade construída, principalmente nos últimos anos, ela aumentou muito. Então você tem diversos problemas de tuberculose, etc. e tal. Então, mas talvez algumas ações pontuais nesse modelo, não a substituição desse modelo por outro, sejam capazes de corrigir questões, graves de saúde. Talvez pequenas movimentações sejam capazes de produzir resultados bastante satisfatórios. Bom, eu queria, agradecer novamente a todos. Esse projeto de Rio das Pedras não se encerra aqui, ele não se encerra com o término dos estúdios da Colômbia que eu trabalhamos sobre eles. A gente está investigando uma série de possibilidades. A gente teve reuniões hoje aqui com o Carti, com a Gina, outras reuniões no decorrer da semana, de como a gente pode tentar levar esse projeto adiante. A gente está confiante nisso, a gente tem paixão por isso, todos os envolvidos têm uma gana de que isso possa acontecer, de que isso possa apresentar resultados que não sejam apenas adequados ao Rio das Pedras, mas que também possam abrir perspectivas para outras situações similares no Rio de Janeiro, no Brasil e em outros países. É muita ambição, mas eu acho que as pequenas transformações é o que vão construindo, vão criando o território e o campo para que as grandes transformações elas possam ocorrer. Bom, muito obrigado a todos.